Get it back.
Hello and welcome, everyone. We are glad to have you with us at today's History is Lunch. My name is Drew Gardner with the two Mississippi Museums, and we are glad to welcome you to this week's History is Lunch. We're in our home, the Craig H. Nielsen Auditorium in the Museum of Mississippi History and the Mississippi Civil Rights Museum. We're also streaming live on Facebook. We'll have a YouTube video posted a little bit later, but the streaming is not working currently. And so if you have anybody interested in watching today, you can share with them the MDH Facebook page, and they'll be able to watch and tune in live to today's program. We hope that you'll make plans to join us for our Black History our Black History Month Family Day program on Sunday, February 22nd from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. This free event will feature family-friendly crafts, performances, and museum learning experiences that are centered on the theme of community engagement. In addition to these activities, this program is partnering with Stewpot to collect shelf-stable food goods. And we hope that you will join us that Sunday, February 22nd. If you'd like any more information, you can see me or any of our museum education staff afterwards, or check out our events page online. Today's History is Lunch continues our America 250 journey as we explore how Mississippi stories have shaped our nation. And we're glad to welcome Dr. Christina J. Thomas, who is a civil rights and community historian. She is currently a postdoctoral fellow at the Center for Civil Rights History and Research at the University of South Carolina. Dr. Thomas previously served from 2023 to 2025 as the Andrew W. Mellon Visiting Scholar at the Margaret Walker Center at Jackson State University. Not only do we have the pleasure of having Dr. Thomas with us today, but we also are proud to welcome the grandchildren of Mrs. Winston Hudson, Mr. Donovan and Kempton Horton, who are going to share a few words as we start this morning about their grandmother. So please, let's give a warm welcome for Donovan and Kempton Horton.
All right, good afternoon. How are y'all doing today? Well, I count this an honor and a privilege to be before you today. You know, to talk about someone who's very special and means the world to me, even in her death over 20 years ago. I want to first of all thank Dr. Thomas, who has given this presentation today. Man, she is a spitfire. She does the job and she works hard and she is very, very intelligent. Give her a round of applause. Okay. All right. She has been looking at this information of my grandmother, doing interviews and researching and driving out to Emory University, where a lot of my grandmother's material is located. During that time, this museum was not here. So a lot of that information is out there. Hopefully we can get a little bit more in this museum as well. So my grandmother would be proud and humbled at the same time, knowing that her story is being told today, you know. And she always said to us, my brother and I, you guys are going to hear more about me after my death. We didn't really understand it at that time. However, the older I get, you know, I realize a lot of things my grandmother, my mother, my father told me are coming true. And I believe, just like Mark Twain said, the older I get, it seems like the more they learn. So where do I start? I mean, we were young kids growing up with my grandmother, the civil rights leader, not really knowing, the magnitude of what she was doing. My brother and I were just having fun, just running and playing and fighting and, looking at the pretty girls and, and whenever we went to a spot with some pretty girls and they were interested in my grandmother, yeah, that's my grandmother over there, but now looking back, just realizing the pressure that my grandmother was under, going through what she went through. And I say my grandmother, but it wasn't just my grandmother. I mean, it was many more people in the community, in the family that were there. Of course, my great aunt, Dovey Hudson, who filed the lawsuit on behalf of her daughter, Diane Hudson. And my grandmother was the president or vice president and then became president of the NAACP during that time frame. So she didn't have any school-age children, right? Now check this out. The pressure on them was tremendous. Everybody was attempting to get them to stop the desegregation lawsuit. There were 3 that were filed. Dr. Gilbert Mason on the coast, Medgar Evers in Jackson, Mississippi, and my family in central Mississippi filed a rural lawsuit to integrate the public school systems. And because of that, the Klan was on them pretty heavy, okay? And the banks didn't give them loans and things like that. So they had a hard time, very, very hard time, to the point where some of the black people in the community started to hate them. And, you need to sit down, you're uneducated, you don't have, basically what they were saying, you don't have the perfect body, you're a woman, you need to get in your place. They didn't know my grandmother. They didn't know my grandmother. And so she took it as she saw a problem and she wanted to right wrongs. And just one last story here. My great aunt Dovey's boys were shooting the Klan in the community who came in to try to harm us, okay? And so the Klan came in and shooting because they wouldn't take their name off the petition. They followed the Klan back and shot into their homes as well, to the point where the state of Mississippi knew that stuff was going on. The Governor Ross Burnett's cousin came to our community, told my grandmother, little children's blood will run in the streets like water if you continue forward with this lawsuit. Did that stop my family? Not at all. They continued forward. They continued forward. So I said all that to say, the more I learn about my grandmother and my family, my grandfather and what they went through, it gives me pride to know that they went through difficult times and they didn't fold under pressure. They didn't fold under pressure to the point where they were hated at first and then they were respected for what they went through. Okay. All right.
All right. All right. Thank you, brother. So good afternoon. I'm glad that everybody could come out. Appreciate that. First of all, I'd like to say thank you to Dr. Thomas because she has done a phenomenal job. So I'd like to give her another round of applause. And when she called Donovan and myself, she called us and she said, look, she said, this is going to be on a strict time limit. So you guys only have a certain amount of time. And then once that's done, that's it. So, but with that being said, so I do appreciate that Dr. Thomas did allow us to talk about the accomplishments of Winson Hudson, my grandmother. So I am Kempton Horton, the youngest grandson of Winson Hudson. You just heard from my brother Donovan. He's the oldest brother. I learned a lot from him too, so you blame him. Okay, so a lot of people didn't know this, but Winson Hudson, my grandmother, her full name was Andrew Winson Gates Hudson, and some people pronounced it anger, and some people pronounced it anger. So she didn't like the anger part because she didn't want people to think that she was an angry person. And if those of you who knew her knew that she didn't have an angry bone in her body. So, and some people often called her Winston Hudson with a T. And it was Winson Hudson without the T. So Winson Hudson, my grandmother, she grew up in Galilee, Mississippi, AKA Harmony, Mississippi. She was married to Cleo Hudson, who died at an early age, 1971. Those of you who knew her knew that she was a nurturing woman. She was a mother and a grandmother to the whole community. There was not a day that people didn't stop by the house. She would give up her last to anyone, and the people just gravitated toward her. I very seldom saw her angry, and if she did get angry, it was kind of a cute little angry. But people couldn't wait to talk to her and tell them about their problems. They would come by the house, and countless hours would go by, and she would, just listen to them, tell the problems. So the NAACP became her dedication. She dedicated her life to the NAACP. That was her passion. She enjoyed it. She loved it. She loved people. So that was right up her alley. So with her already being a people person, once the bug bit her, she ran with it. She knew that that was her calling. She didn't get paid for doing it. She just did it. She enjoyed being around the people and being there for the people. The NAACP was her life. So we would often travel, and my brother can attest to this. We would often travel to the Sun and Sands Hotel. I know those of you remember the Sun and Sands Hotel. I believe it's still there. But the Sun and Sands Hotel and also the Masonic Lodge. So there they would have the NAACP meetings. When the meetings were over, she would tell my mom to back the car up so that she could load the car NAACP flyers, voter registration cards, and other paraphernalia. So she would take all of this information back to Lee County, to the community, and if she heard of any other federal programs, or any federal programs from Washington, D.C., she would come back with the news back to Lee County to spread the news. So once she got back to Lee County, that was kind of her stomping ground. And, she kind of went to work in Lee County. But during election time, all the candidates that were running for election would stop by the house. And they would just sit and talk with her for a while, drink some coffee and talk. And those that wanted to get elected, they would make sure that they sat a while. So once she got a warm and fuzzy feeling about a candidate, and she thought that she would support that candidate, it was game over. So on voting day, my grandmother and my mom would drive, and I can remember this. My grandmother and mother would drive all day long, taking people back and forth to the polls. And sun up, sundown, she would call and she would say, "Hey, did you vote? I'll be there in 15 minutes. You just be ready." So if she wanted a candidate in office, she would go to work. So now, I say all that to say this. After everything that she had been through, she wanted to capture everything, all of her works that she had encountered throughout the years. Those of you also knew that she worked countlessly hours working on a book, Mississippi Harmony. She worked with Alice Walker, Marilyn Lauren, and there were others, Connie Curry, and she wanted to capture everything in that book. That was a goal of hers that she wanted to get out of the way before she passed away. And there was also a poem that she would always say about, "I'm slowly passing away." When she became ill, the phone never stopped ringing. People called from all over the place checking on her. And unfortunately, when she did pass, my brother and I, we went through a dark time, and we said that there would never be another person who cared about people like my grandmother. So she, once she had all her works in the books, I think that she could rest after that. So I will say thank you all for listening to me, and stay tuned. In about 2 weeks, I am working on a website that will kind of put her works out there so that you'll be able to view it. So thank you all for listening to me. Thank you.
You have contributed more than any race in this nation, coming down through hard trials and tribulation, fought in every war in America's name. You never dragged her flag to shame. Oh come before it's too late. Don't you see I'm swiftly passing away? If I don't tell you, you will never know where you came from and where you should go. Now I said that everywhere I have a chance to speak.
Okay. First, I want to say Happy Black History Month to everyone. It's February. It's also 100 years of Black History Month, too. And I want to thank Donovan and Kempton Horton for coming on stage and introducing their grandmother to you. I came to know her, but they knew her. And I thought it was very important for them to, start this presentation. And there's also something very beautiful about talking about Miss Hudson in her home state of Mississippi. When I go to other places and speak about her, it's often, who is that again? Who is this person? Who is this woman? But here there's a bit of familiarity as many can come and reflect about their moments and their interactions with Miss Hudson. And I also want to thank Marilyn Lowen, who is a civil rights veteran who connected me with the family and sort of inspired this project as well. So thank you again for the opportunity. I want to thank Drew, as well as the tech crew and just everyone involved, and you all in the audience today for being here. So Ms. Hudson wrote the poem you just heard, "If I Don't Tell You, You Will Never Know," in the summer of 1989 while speaking in my home state of North Carolina, actually. And to begin, I want to read the full poem as you only heard her recite the last few lines. And it goes, "Oh, come, my dear children, and sit by my knee, and let me tell you the cost to be free. If I don't tell you, you never will know where you came from and where you should go. You have contributed more than any race in this nation, coming through hard trials and tribulations, fought in every war in America's name. You have never dragged her flag to shame. You see, I'm swiftly passing away. You can't afford to wait another day. If I don't tell you, you will never know where you came from and where you should go." And I open with this poem because first, it is always great to hear Ms. Hudson's voice, but two, it speaks to the motivation behind her writing and publishing Mississippi Harmony, Memoirs of a Mississippi Freedom Fighter. Many of us are familiar with the 2002 text, which she co-authored with civil rights activist and writer Constance Curry. The poem, "If I Don't Tell You, You Will Never Know," opens the book and also concludes the book. In the final chapter, Ms. Hudson spoke about her happiness, but also lamented that society is moving back to the 1960s and doing much of the work that she and the other activists fought so hard for. And she wrote, and I quote, "So I just try to tell the story about what happened and is still happening, and I pray and I hope." The poem I wrote back in 1989 says it all about the cost to be free, end of quote. The book, divided into 6 chapters, is a firsthand account of Ms. Hudson's activism. These chapters focus on her long battle to register to vote, her 38-year tenure as president of the Leake County NAACP, which she helped organize, her work on school desegregation, Freedom Summer, and Project Head Start. Through this memoir, Ms. Hudson also documented her activism with the Federal Housing Authority to secure loans and her leadership in even bringing telephone lines into the all-Black community of Harmony. This book addresses themes of Black self-defense, surveillance, and grassroots organizing, and Ms. Hudson also recognizes others in her community that were also pivotal to the Lee County movement, including her husband, Mr. Cleo Hudson, her sister, Dovey Hudson, the Greers, Dotsons, McDonald's, and several others. But what I never knew when I first read Mississippi Harmony is that the book origins date back to 1967, when Ms. Hudson began first drafting her narrative. This marked the start of a 35-year publishing journey she embarked on, with her lifelong goal being to see it and touch it while she was still alive. Because of her continued organizing and health issues, and also the reality of the financial cost of publishing, Ms. Hudson took several pauses in writing, while also seeking to secure a publisher. Across the decades, various drafts were nearly complete, each distinct in its own way, with different titles, and reflected of the time in which she was writing or recording her story with different editors, hence the use of my language of autobiographies. These various drafts exist in the papers of Alice Walker and Constance Curry, all conveniently located at Emory University, where Ms. Hudson papers are also preserved. And it's a lot too for a researcher. It saves a lot of money when you don't have to travel to many places, but it's all conveniently located in one place. And Marilyn Lowen also shared several electronic files. Beyond what became Mississippi Harmony, I identified 3 other significant drafts or works in progress in these collections that take on a traditional write-in or compilation of oral histories in book form written around 1968, 1985, the 1990s, there were multiple book proposals with different titles, and the early 2000s with editors including Alice Walker, Jean Fairfax, Marilyn Lowen, and of course, Curry. And I just want to add other titles and proposals that floated around for the book, Mississippi Harmony. This included Into the Lion's Jaw, The Life and Times of Winson Hudson, Mother of the Mississippi Civil Rights Movement, Lay My Burdens Down, and the poem title itself, If I Don't Tell You, You Will Never Know. Despite the passage of time, these drafts represented a history of harmony, of Mississippi, and of America. And over the course of 35 years, Ms. Hudson remained steadfast in her goal of publishing while continuing to organize and battle numerous health issues. At one point, she even lost previous drafts in an accidental house fire. But Ms. Hudson honored her story, viewing the book as her final life goal. Ms. Hudson even let her grandson assistants with strict instructions and directions about her papers. When I interviewed them a few years ago, they recalled, in high school, we just remember her saying, watch over my papers over there, because one day I'm gonna put them together and make a book. So for today's History's Lunch, I want to share a bit about her publishing journey, centering on the 2 earliest drafts I came across in the archive from the late 1960s. The first is an untitled handwritten draft by Ms. Hudson, and the second was entitled The Autobiography of Ms. Winson Hudson, a Black Woman of Mississippi, edited by writer Alice Walker. And now I know the family spoke briefly about Ms. Hudson, but I want to open with 2 of my favorite stories about her. So in 1937, Ms. Winson Hudson made her first attempt to register to vote. Over the decades, she would take the long walk to the courthouse, at times joined by her sisters, Ms. Debbie Hudson and Ms. Alice Gates Greer, also accompanied by her husband, Mr. Cleo Hudson, who would wait by the car. And just a quick note, these were all civil rights activists in their own right. Ms. Hudson often went to the courthouse in a red dress. You can't miss me, she would tell federal observers. She described the process, the literacy tests, the threats, the stares, and the fear. She recalled an incident in 1961 in which a man placed a card beside each one of the sisters, and it read, "The eyes of the Klan are upon you. You have been identified by the white knights of the Ku Klux Klan." After 25 years, Ms. Hudson successfully passed with support from the NAACP and the Justice Department. That final time when asked to interpret a portion of the state's constitution, she wrote, "It said what it meant, and it meant what it said." Yes. 2 years later, in 1964, Ms. Winson and Dovey Hudson hosted volunteers joining the Mississippi Summer Project the massive civil rights initiative led by the Council of Federated Organizations. Mr. Theodis Hewitt served as the county's project coordinator. About 13 individuals came to Harmony that late June, and the sisters housed 4 young women: Annie Pearl Clay, Pam Gerard, Jane Addams, pictured here, and Carol Gross. Like so many who open up their homes to volunteers, they risked the violence and the threats against their life. When the group first arrived in Harmony, they were greeted by the Hudsons and other community members. The county sheriff also came to greet the volunteers. He demanded to know who invited you all here. Ms. Hudson walked up to him and responded, "We invited them here." This was the bold and courageous woman I read about in Mississippi Harmony, one of the many grassroots homegrown leaders in Mississippi, whom Derek Bell said that without them, civil rights lawyers and organizations could accomplish nothing here. And these were the stories I explored while researching women in the movement, especially those who voted or attempted to try to vote before the 1940s and those involved in Freedom Summer. But I became more fascinated by the year 1967, the year Ms. Hudson decided to write her story, which I consider an extension of her activism. I say this because in doing so, she began documenting her family's history and the Lee County movement. Picking up a pen or a pencil, Ms. Hudson tapped into what scholar Joanne M. Braxton called a tradition within a tradition, following a long intellectual and cultural practice of Black women speaking and writing about themselves. And then in the 1960s and even into the early 1970s, very few Black Mississippian women wrote their autobiographies. So this includes, we can think about Fannie Lou Hamer's autobiography published in 1967, and Moody's published the following year, and Vera Piggy, the Coahoma County NAACP leaders, The Struggles of Struggles, and I encourage you to read the edited edition by Francois Hamlin that was published in 1975. And also during this period, there was many Black women who were not Mississippians, but activists like Anna Hedgeman, Septima Clark, as well as Daisy Bates, who also will publish autobiographies. So if she did publish during the 1960s, she would join these other women as well. And many scholars conclude that civil rights activists typically wrote autobiographies to push back against the grand narrative of the movement. And perhaps early on, Ms. Hudson recognized that historians would overlook a small county called Harmony. Yet in 1967, Ms. Hudson and others wrote while the movement still unfolded, as she faced violence, including a failed attempt by the Klan to bomb her home. Down the road, they bombed her sister's home twice within a month. She wrote at a time when mailing a letter required tucking it in a sock box and sending it to a relative in Chicago who would mail it on her behalf to appropriate congressmen. But perhaps after one incident or for the encouragement of others or through one of those sleepless nights, she started to write. It was Alice Walker who briefly discussed Ms. Hudson's early motivation in a 1970 essay published in the Black Scholar, later reprinted in Search of Our Mother's Gardens, A Woman is Prose. Walker laid out 3 of the author's reasons for crafting her memoir. The first was that at age 52, Ms. Hudson was unsure how much time she had left. The second, she wanted to set the record straight for her community about what happened, not so that they could know, but that their children would come to know about the Lee County movement and all who were involved. Lastly, it troubled Ms. Hudson that those in her community misunderstood her activism. And I'm not sure who directly she was talking about during that time, but they misunderstood her activism, and she wanted them to know that the agitation she and others caused was to better the lives of everyone in the community and not a single person. And for these reasons, the Harmony resident only wanted enough copies of her autobiography to go to every Black resident in Lee County. So she wasn't looking at directly a broad readership or a broad audience that she was writing to. And by 1968, she had about a 20-page draft, which she would hand to Alice Walker to read. And so now, how did the women meet? In her essay, Walker described Ms. Hudson as such. She's a large, handsome woman with bright coppery skin and crisp, dark hair. Her eyes are deeply brown and uncommonly alert. When she is speaking to you, her eyes hold you. At the same time, they seem to be scanning the landscape. Her eyes tell a great deal about Ms. Hudson, for she is one of the sleepless ones, found in embattled Mississippi towns, whose fight has been not only against unjust laws and verbal harassment, but against guns and firebombs as well. Alice Walker first came to Mississippi in 1966, working for the NAACP's Legal Defense Fund, collecting depositions from sharecroppers in Greenwood. At the third annual gathering of the Veterans of the Mississippi Civil Rights Movement conference in 2008, she shared that she joined the movement to honor the dignity and tenacity of her family and of her ancestors. Through this work, she met her former husband, Brooklyn-born civil rights attorney Melvin Leventhal, and after a year out of state, they returned in 1968. Walker joined Friends of Children of Mississippi as a Black history consultant. A Head Start organization, FCM had just received federal funding after nearly 18 months of operating solely on private donations. It stood out to Walker because of its grassroots beginnings with a director who had come out of SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, Fred Mangrum. The organization tasked her with creating booklets and workshops on Black history for FCM teachers who could in turn teach this history to children and really instill in them pride within their race. This role resonated with Walker on a personal level. As a child, she recalled growing up ashamed of her Blackness because nobody had told me how great and beautiful my ancestors were. Through these workshops, autobiographies will become a central tool for participants to see and understand themselves as part of history, a lesson that was inspired by Ms. Hudson. And I say that because some literature talk about Ms. Hudson producing an autobiography as a result of these Black history workshops. But Alice Walker states in a speech in 1972, "Nor were all these women waiting simply around for me to show up and ask them to write about myself. Ms. Hudson was already writing her autobiography when I was introduced to her." While in Mississippi, Leventhal and many others told Walker about a great woman of courage and harmony. The two women met at the Harmony Head Start Center where Ms. Hudson served as director. She handed Walker a draft of her autobiography, and they sat under a tree reading her story together. Ms. Hudson offered her own recollection of this meeting. She shared in a 1995 interview, she, Walker, came to Harmony with Head Start and found me writing under a shaded tree at the Harmony Center. I was almost crying. She wasn't much of a well-known writer then, and neither was I. When Kempton Horton took me and two others to the Harmony Head Start Center, I immediately looked for that tree, but it was basically a forest, and there were a lot of trees, so I really don't know what I was thinking. But I almost imagine which tree they sat under, if that tree was even still there. But I imagine the conversation went on for hours as the two Southern-born women, who were nearly 30 years apart in age, sat and talked. And under that tree, the women devised a writing plan. It involved Ms. Hudson mailing new pages of her autobiography to Walker and Jackson, who would then edit and type them. And those 20 pages soon gained the title, The Autobiography of Ms. Winson Hudson, a Black woman of Mississippi. So now if you know me, you know I love the archive, and I love showcasing the archive as well. And so you'll see here, this is one of the earliest drafts I've located from either 1967 or 1968. It's a handwritten document by Ms. Winson Hudson, and one of the two in her handwriting that are located in Alice Walker's papers at Emory. So to be clear, I'm not sure if these were the exact papers that she handed to Alice Walker, as it was undated. Yet in this draft that I want to talk about briefly, Ms. Hudson opened with her family's history, echoing in response to what Ella Baker would ask many individuals who entered her home, "Now, who are your people?" And she would begin by writing, "My grandmother was named Angeline, and I was named after her. I was named Anger Winson. She married a man by the name of George Turner. We all called him Pappy instead of Grandpa. Grandma and Pappy looked like pure Africans. Pappy was brought in Alabama, Lee County. He didn't talk about things like Grandma did, but he did a few things. He said his whole family was sold off, and all of them went to different places. He never heard anything else of his family, but he died wanting to go back to Alabama. Pappy got many beatings in Alabama," he said, but still he wanted to go back. I guess he thought if he could go back, he might could find some of his family. Ms. Hudson remembered and recounted, and this draft is about 15, 16 pages, if I'm correct. Ms. Hudson remembered her grandmother's stories about being an enslaved child, working primarily in her enslaver's home. She remembered the songs her grandmother sang when she was a child, down in Dixie and cotton East picking so bad. She also reminisced over her favorite stories that her grandmother shared, which her father would repeatedly tell her to stop sharing with them. The story involved her grandmother learning about the forthcoming Civil War. She wrote, "Her mistress crying, master was crying too. She ran to them to see what she could do. Mistress told me the North and the South is in a war and your master will have to go. She told me if the North wins, they will make you all go. You will have to get out on your own, get food and clothes the best way you can." I was crying, but my heart was leaping for joy. This same story 35 years later will be printed in the published memoir. In this early draft, Ms. Hudson also spoke about her father, John Gates, Reverend John Gates, and his concern for his 13 children, whom he raised following his wife's early death. Early on, she wrote about her girlhood memories and the gender violence Black girls like her encounter when simply walking outside of their homes. Ms. Hudson wrote, "I couldn't walk down the roads at any time alone for I fear I might meet a white man or a boy, and I know what could happen." Her father's fear extended to her brothers who he was also afraid of what could happen if they accidentally looked a white girl or a woman in their direction, looked in their eye, or walked past their home when they were alone. And even as a child, she concluded how this fear carried from her grandparents to her father after a group of white men lynched their son, his brother, framed for killing a white man around 1916 or 1917. From these pages, family stood as a central theme as Ms. Hudson remembered and documented her family's history, largely from her grandmother's stories, which reminds me greatly of Margaret Walker's Jubilee as well. But these family histories and girlhood memories detailed how these early experiences informed and created an activist as she came to learn what it meant to be Black in Mississippi and America. The final write-in Ms. Hudson would send to Walker, who would then edit and type the work. And as you can see here, it largely involved adding punctuation marks, as well as some grammatical edits as well. And I also recognize I can't discuss all the drafts today with you all, but I just want you to see briefly how sort of these passages appear in the final publication, Mississippi Harmony. So for the most part, the stories sort of remained the same. It was just condensed, probably by publishers' request to keep it at a minimum of a certain amount of page numbers too. And by 1969, or at least by the time Walker submitted her final draft to the Black Scholar, the women had partially completed the autobiography of Miss Winson Hudson, and a portion would also be published in that essay as well. And so for the remainder of the presentation, I sit with this draft for many reasons. The first being a more practical one of time, but primarily this was Miss Hudson's first attempt at working with an editor to get her story out there. Some portions within these 22 pages make it to the final publication in 2002. However, much of it remains in this document. It reflects Ms. Hudson's initial motivations for writing her story to address the people, particularly the children of Leake County, about why she and others joined the movement, especially as it continued and expanded. Many of the events she discussed are not distant memories, nor are her analysis, and several themes emerged in this unfinished work in progress. Themes of racial violence, themes of self-defense, a personal interrogation for herself and readers about what it truly means to be an American in the late 1960s, and finally, because it's Black History Month, the importance of learning and teaching Black history. Whereas the handwritten draft opens with her family history, this autobiography begins with Ms. Hudson situating herself as a resident of Leake County. The opening sentences read, "I live in Leake County, I was born here, my father and mother was born here." Clearly, no one could question her ties to the community. Next, Ms. Hudson briefly explains why she left Leake County for a moment when she moved to Chicago, but she quickly notes that she moved back after realizing that Black folks were left out in Chicago, just as they were in Mississippi. Then in just one paragraph, she recounted the oppression her family faced as Harmony residents, the lynching of her uncle, her father losing 100 acres of land for merely $500, her mother's premature death to medical racism, and how she began working at the age of 9 alongside her father. As she shared these painful stories, she then moves towards a reparative sense of understanding justice. She tells readers within the first page, "This is why I'm going to be here in Lee County. This county owes me a lot. It owes my parents and my grandparents. Now, how can this debt be paid, and who is the beneficiary?" A story that emerges within the front pages as well that is left out of Mississippi Harmony is the near lynching of her father, Reverend John Gates. He served as a minister at multiple congregations, and when he traveled home late one day from one of his churches more than 24 miles away, a group of white men stopped him. They wanted his horse, which was named George Gaines. And I say the name because in this draft, she rarely names individuals, but names the horse. She doesn't name any family names either, so it was very interesting to see the horse be named. And the man debated what to do with her father, to whip him, to kill him, or throw him in the river. But one person stepped in and said to let him go. Ms. Hudson also described the violence she and her sisters faced for decades and decades later, detailing the near bombing of her home and the bombing of Ms. Dovey Hudson's home in November 1967. And for years, Klansmen target them because Ms. Dovey's daughter's name will appear in the desegregation lawsuit alongside the sons of Medgar Evers and Gilbert Mason. The story also addressed another theme of self-defense for which the Harmony community was known for. Folks called it entering the lion's jaw, which is one of the possible titles she explored for the book, because they knew once you were in there, folks were going to make it hard for you to get out. Rims Barber, who I see in the back, he would recall in an interview, and he would say, whenever I would go up to Harmony to deliver something, I would always let the folks up there know I was coming. You didn't just go into their community without letting somebody know you're coming, because they would meet you out by the road armed. Right in the late 1960s, Ms. Hudson also confronted the limitations of the war on poverty, particularly her organizing with Head Start, sharing that it crystallized my consciousness of how Black I really was. With states and federal attacks against the Child Development Group of Mississippi, or CDGM, she understood how society could easily dispose of poor and working class Black people. When she first worked for CDGM, Ms. Hudson firmly believed, and she used the repetitive language of, "I thought I could. I thought I could help the country. I thought I could make it stand by its promises. I thought I could build a society full of free men." But she came to realize that when Black people gained economic power, white Mississippians became afraid because economic stability and political power went hand in hand. Through Head Start, Ms. Hudson had the opportunity to attend training programs out of the state. She always wanted to see the Statue of Liberty and finally did while observing Head Start centers in Black and Puerto Rican neighborhoods in Harlem. Her excitement over seeing the landmark symbol of freedom quickly went away as she sat in these classrooms. What did the Statue of Liberty mean to those little children and their families, she wrote. Visiting New York during the holidays, she also wondered what if the money spent on lights and decorations were given to these families, were given to poor communities? Then how could freedom become an uncommon struggle for people? Lastly, I want to close, just for time, with Ms. Hudson's thoughts in the text in this first autobiography draft about the teaching of Black history. Head Start offered training and workshops for teachers and center administrations in African and African American history. Echo and Walker's sentiments, no one taught her about how beautiful or rich her history was, especially African history. Ms. Hudson began with the following statement, and something that I paused over numerous times when I read it, when she says, "The more I read about Africa, the more I liked myself. From little children, we were taught to hate ourselves because we were Black or because we came from an uncivilized country." She encouraged people to learn for themselves about their cultural heritage in order to teach their children, one of the many goals of these history workshops. But Ms. Hudson went further, addressing every Black person in Lee County, and I'm gonna just read her words, especially as we honor 100 years of Black History Month as well. "This I must say to Negroes in Lee County, whether born slum poor, middle class comfortable, or truly rich. There is one thing every youth and adult must remember: he is Negro. He must remember that his ancestors were snatched away from a home of freedom and brought into a foreign land as slaves. He must remember that even as slaves, they played a great part in developing this country into the richest and most powerful country in the world. He must remember that in the bloody war that climaxed the great moral revolt against the immorality of slavery, His ancestors played a significant role, both on the battlefield, where they served by the hundreds of thousands, and in the political and social reform that was instituted after the fighting has ceased. She concluded with a series of sentences calling for that the Negro must remember, and using this repetitive language. And so she concludes with the Negro youth and adult must remember his ancestors, not in shame, but in pride. They must be proud of the Black man and woman who, against the greatest of odds, managed first to survive. And to conclude, this portion does not make it into the book at all, which is why I think it's important to look at all the various drafts collectively in order to fully understand this grassroots leader and the evolution of her intellectual thought. But this draft remained a work in progress, as Walker shared that the project had paused. Ms. Hudson had to leave Mississippi briefly for much needed rest, she explained. And although Ms. Hudson continued to slowly write with the assistance of family and friends, it would not be until the 1980s when Jean Fairfax travels to Harmony and begins leading a series of oral histories with Ms. Hudson and her sister, Ms. Dovey, that the project would begin again. So thank you, and I will open it now for questions.
Thank you, Dr. Thomas, for a wonderful presentation. And a dear lady who's like an aunt to me, Marilyn Walker, was the daughter of Mrs. Zenobia LaFleur Kincaid. And I think Marilyn told us that Miss Kincaid was related to Miss Hudson and talked about a lot of this history with her family being helping to protect people during the Civil Rights Movement. And my question is to you, Dr. Thomas, and to the family, to the beautiful Hudson family. I remember reading several times Dr. Derek Bell's book, Faces at the Bottom of the Well, and he wrote his preface talking about family in Leake County. Now, I know he did civil rights work in that area as well, but is he related to you all, or do you know?
No. Oh. And Derek Bell would do the foreword of the book, but he would closely work with families in Leake County through his work with the NAACP's Legal Defense Fund. And with that book and another story as well, it really helps with his framing on critical race theory, because he would put in the foreword of the book that he actually called Ms. Hudson to apologize because they reached out to them about wanting to reopen the all-Black School of Harmony. And he said, you know, the NAACP is interested in leading these desegregation suits. And he apologizes and said, I don't think that was the best decision I made. So that's something he always pondered about in his work, which is why Leake County comes up consistently. Yeah.
Thank you, thank you. I have a question. Was Harmony, the town of Harmony, originally built to be a safe place from a sundown town? What was the population, and how far was it from Carthage and Philadelphia, even though Philadelphia is in Neshoba County?
So, because I know the county neighbors Neshoba, from what I understand with Constance Curry and some of the interviews, that after the Civil War, and maybe you all can chime in too, but it was created sort of as a safe town for Black people. And so there will be a lot of Black people who own land actually in Harmony community, and it remained pretty much an all-Black town as well. I don't know if the family wants to chime in.
I'll chime in a little bit. From our front porch, Carthage was about 15 miles from our house, and Philadelphia was about 20, a little bit over. So they were neighbors, Lee County and Neshoba County. And one thing I didn't say was James Chaney used to stay with my grandmother on and off, and she warned them to be careful when they went over to Neshoba County because she, in her words, they were bloodthirsty. Michael Schwerner stayed with my great aunt Dovey, and I'm not sure where Andrew Goodman stayed, but they were very well connected with each other. I mean, the civil rights community was very small. There was only a few folks that were brave enough to do the good work back then.
Dr. Thomas, as we get to our next question, I wanted to bring up, you shared a little bit about the resistance and armed resistance, and there's often some misconception about the civil rights movement and nonviolence. And opposed to kind of what Charlie Cobb poses unviolence. And so can you talk a little bit about that and what that looked like in Leake County?
Yes, that's funny. I was just teaching my students about nonviolence and self-defense. But yes, so there will be this journalist, I forget the article, I think it was 1963, 1964 for the New York Times, and he would talk about the irony of staying with families in harmony, but they had guns under their bed. So he talked about the sort of that irony as well. And then again, you know, the community being known as the lion's jaw, so that when you come in, it's very hard for you to get out. And if I can go back to one of the slides as well, this one, where you sort of have they build a community center in 1964, and you have residents of the community sitting on the roof and standing guard to protect these buildings, to protect these sites of civil rights as well. And so this comes out of Mississippi Notebook. So it greatly documents as well if you want to read more about the Harmony community and self-defense as well. And I think one last story I'll share too about Winston Hudson, when she talks about that the night the home was bombed, you know, she talks about how her and her husband were outside emptying their guns into the air, firing back to try to ward off, you know, the Klansmen who were coming in too.
Yes, my question concerns religion. You didn't mention very much about Ms. Hudson's religious background and how it influenced her. What was the religious institution in Leake County at that time, and how much did they resist, the white religious groups resist civil rights?
Yeah, this is why it's good to have the family here, because I was going to pivot, but I know she attended Galilee Church, but I was going to pivot that one to the family.
I'm glad you asked that question. The religious community, some were supportive, others were not, but Galilee Church was very supportive. And a lot of times they had meetings there, and my grandmother was able to speak freely about what was going on and what was needed. You know, a lot of times when people put pressure on you to change your statements or change your belief or take your name off a petition, people get scared and they don't want to get involved. And Medgar Evers, when he came to Harmony, he said that, you know, some people are going to get killed. He was aware of that. And if you don't have anything to give them, you know, don't sell them false dreams, basically. You know, and one last thing, my grandmother said they always told her, she always heard that she was too mean to pray. And I asked her, I said, well, Grandma, was that true? And she would always smile. She would say, no, that wasn't true. When we got ready to register to vote, my sister and I went down to the bathroom to pray.
Yeah.
And because there were a group of white men that were at the end of the hallway chewing tobacco, and, you know, she mentioned her red flannel shirts. And she said her and her sister went down to pray, and her sister said, prayed, must we go? Must we go? And my grandmother said, Dover, we got to go. and then Aunt Dovey said, Winson, God got a shield around us. They can't touch us. And so with that being said, they walked up those stairs, and she said as they went past those men, it was like parting the Red Sea. They were turning their backs. They were cursing now, but they didn't touch them. They didn't touch them, and they were able to go there and vote, or not try to attempt to register. And that was when the card of the clans are upon you. The eyes of the clan are upon you. It was set up there on the counter.
I'm from Lee County, Carthage. Family is at Harmony, at Galilee Baptist Church. And I remember Miss Hudson many times coming to the northern part of Lee County to our church called DeLeedy Hill. And the experience, the thing that she did there was trying to convince the community about civil rights and the things that we could get if we would just start trying to work together, and she would help us get roads and all those things. And she did a very fantastic job at doing that. I met her several times while she was at the church, and whenever she came up to the church in our community, the effort that she put forth, because I went to a school called Conway at first, and it burned down, and we had no place to go. It was through her that we wound up with the school that was over Thomastown, and it was first called Thomastown High School, but it was a school that had elementary children, and that's all they would do. So I wound up graduating from that school that was designed for elementary students. But to be able to get a school, period, it was through Winson Hudson.
Thank you.
Thank you. Brilliant performance. I was just wondering, was Ms. Hudson influenced in any way by Dr. Marcus Garvey, the Jamaican who was preaching black was beautiful and black should return to Africa? Was her feelings about blackness have anything to do with Marcus Garvey's belief in black beauty, black pride? He spoke about Marcus Garvey from Jamaica. He spoke about black is beautiful and black pride and that kind of thing, and black should talk about going back to Africa. Was she influenced in any way by his work and his beliefs?
Well, so not directly that I've been able to find.
And secondly, I'm sorry. Secondly, was the amount of violence that was meted out against her. Why didn't she have any protection from the police?
I think people's response answers your second question. But to answer your first question, I haven't directly found any ties of her being directly influenced by Marcus Garvey. It was really these Black History workshops that were emergent out of Head Start, where they did teach children about Marcus Garvey and other figures as well. But the hope was through these workshops that they would instill racial pride in people who never, and Alice Walker does a beautiful job in that short story, but yet the Cotton Gin, that she wrote for the Black Scholar, of the challenges of what does it mean to teach people who never were taught to see themselves as beautiful, to love themselves, to start seeing themselves as beautiful. And so the hope was through these workshops was that, you know, when you go into a Head Start classroom, it's the big thing of representation matters. How can we get children to understand themselves as part of history? So learning about, you know, the role of Black people in the Civil War, in World War I, but just learning about, you know, Black history through American history and making sure they understood that connection. So that's where that came from.
Hello.
Hi.
I'm so sorry I missed different parts, but I understand that this is a moment of awakening, it's supposed to be. This is a wonderful time to live, because it's a bittersweet opportunity for us to look at ourselves and know what, and understand and answer our own prayer by what should I do? All of this so it doesn't happen again. What you just taught about? What should we do? What should I do? Should I continue to talk about it, or is there something that I should be doing other than talking about my history? Like I said, now I know I'm from the jungle. Is that what the Times says? Our president said that my leaders are like hair on the chest and all that wonderful stuff. So it's bittersweet. I'm loving the moment. I know I need to look at myself. So I don't know. I mean, why am I waiting for someone else to clear the field? What should I do?
Yeah, and I think too, you know, as I expand this project, you know, to understand Ms. Hudson's biography and the understanding of a political biography, how not only she's talking in the ways of documenting her family's history, talking about her work in the movement, but it's also prescriptive as well, and telling people and giving people the tools and the resources, from her background, from her understanding and the time period she's writing about on how to move forward. And so that's where the, you must learn about Black history, you must remember, the poem that she had as well, which captures, her statements, particularly the last part of this autobiography, just in a poem as well. But I think, for me, just responding to what you're saying, as well as just the importance of learning Black history, but also the importance of documenting these local histories, these local movements that are, there's many harmonies in the state of Mississippi and also nationwide as well.
I kind of have thoughts that piggyback on the last two questions. And one is, as you were talking about the time, the years that all of this happened, then I'm constantly like putting myself back in that time, saying, how old was I? Well, how much did I know about what was going on? But the one thing that I do remember is a lot of Black people were not all aware and in support of what was going on. But I think that was probably because they didn't fully understand the movement. And when it came to Black history, I remember as a teenager, people were saying, ain't no such thing as Black history. And they called us communists for trying to teach the children. So I wonder if she was in that too, or how widespread that was, because I was here in Jackson. And then the other thing is that poem about if I don't tell you, I think it's a very strong poem, because so many of our children grow up and we don't share our history now. Like when I was growing up, we were encouraged to go and listen to the older people. But now they're on their phones. Everything they need to know comes from YouTube and Instagram and so forth. And the last point is I'm thinking of James Brown, Black and Proud. When that came out, that was a big boost to the ego. And a lot sparked off from that.
Thank you for those. I'll just quickly, do you want to take it? I would just quickly say, part of the first point where you're talking about, there were some people who did not support the movement. And this is part of the reason why, what Alice Walker identified as one of her motivations of people not understanding about the agitation she and others caused in Lee County or what the work they were doing. And I think a lot of people were just very fearful, especially when you have such attacks that can cost you your life or destroy your home or put you in harm's way as well, of why they wanted to distance themselves from people like Ms. Hudson or other movement leaders.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's give Christina, Donovan, and Kipton another round of applause for being with us today.